Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, rubbing the sleep out of your eyes, pouring a cup of coffee, and realizing that the United States simply does not exist.
Yeah, it's a staggering thought experiment. I mean,
Yeah.
the human mind naturally resists it
Right.
because we just, anchor our entire understanding of reality to the map exactly as it currently is.
Right. You just look at a globe and where the entire landmass of the Americas should be like North, Central, and South America there is just, well,
It's
water.
just an endless empty ocean,
Exactly. No New York skyline, no Silicon Valley, no moon land. I mean, not even a McDonald's on the corner or a Coca-Cola in your fridge.
which is wild to think about.
It really is. You are suddenly sitting in a reality where the very foundations of the modern world have been completely, totally erased. And we're not just talking about missing a few iconic landmarks here.
Oh, far from it. I mean, we tend to view history as this inevitable forward-marching monolith, right?
Yeah, like it was always supposed to happen this way.
Exactly. We assume the modern world looks the way it does because it had to.
Right.
But this thought experiment, it forces us to confront this deeply unsettling reality. The geopolitical center of gravity, our technological progress, and even like our cultural identities are almost entirely dependent on a massive prehistoric geographical accident.
It's a total accident.
Yeah. And when you pull out a thread that colossal, the entire fabric of human existence just unravels. We are looking at a total collapse of humanity's balance, followed by a completely unrecognizable reformation.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring a wildly ambitious, meticulously researched strategic blueprint, actually a script for a proposed alternate history documentary.
And it's brilliant.
It really is. It's titled, What If America Never Existed? The Timeline That Would Change Everything.
That's a great concept.
Right. And this isn't your standard surface-level what-if scenario.
Yeah.
The creators have mapped out this profound, incredibly rigorous domino effect.
They really did the math on this one.
They did. So we're going to unpack exactly how the absence of that single landmass rewrites the mechanics of global power, stalls human technology, fundamentally alters the nature of war, and this is the part that genuinely gave me an existential crisis.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, how it literally dictates your own personal, literal existence.
It's a masterful deconstruction, honestly.
Yeah.
It uses the cinematic language of a premium documentary to just, challenge everything you assume about your world.
Totally.
So to really grasp the sheer scale of the disruption, we have to start at the exact moment the timelines diverge.
Yeah.
We have to go back to the inciting incident of the modern era.
Back to the late 15th century.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are in 1492. Christopher Columbus sails west across the Atlantic.
Right.
He's looking for a western trade route to the Indies, fueled by the financial backing of the Spanish crown. In our reality, he hits the Bahamas.
Yeah.
But in this timeline, the creators paint this incredibly haunting, visceral picture. Columbus sails his wooden ships into the expanse, and he finds absolutely nothing.
Nothing but water.
Just endless dark ocean and violent storm systems. And expedition after expedition goes out over the next few decades, pushing further into the gales, burning through resources, and every single one returns empty-handed.
If they return at all.
Right. It's just a terrifyingly blank map.
What's fascinating here is the immediate catastrophic economic mechanism that this triggers. I mean, we have to look at the financial state of Europe at that exact moment.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Spain, having just completed the Reconquista in 1492, was essentially bankrupt.
Wow, really?
Oh, yeah. They had spent enormous sums unifying their territory and fighting endless wars. Columbus was, he was basically a venture capital bet.
Ah, I see.
They desperately needed a massive return on investment.
So what does this all mean? It's like a heavily leveraged startup burning all its remaining venture capital on a massive make-or-break product launch, only to discover the consumer market literally doesn't exist.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
The capital just vanishes into the Atlantic.
Exactly. Because in our timeline, what did the Americas actually provide? It wasn't just land. It was this unprecedented sovereign injection of hyperliquid wealth.
Right, the gold and silver.
Yes, specifically the silver mines of Potosi in Bolivia, which pumped tens of thousands of tons of silver into the global economy.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, it was staggering that silver literally capitalized the Spanish Empire, allowing them to fund massive global armadas, dominate European politics, and basically force their way into Asian trade networks.
Wow.
So you take away the Americas, and Spain never becomes a global superpower. They simply default on their debts.
And it isn't just Spain that deflates, right? The entire European economic engine stalls out.
Completely.
But I mean, I'm struggling with this a bit. If Europe doesn't have the Americas to exploit, why wouldn't they just, immediately pivot south?
That's a great question.
Like, why not aggressively colonize Africa or push into the Middle East 300 years earlier? Why do they just sit there and stagnate?
Well, it gets to the core of historical mechanics.
Yeah.
You can't just, pivot to colonizing Africa in the 1500s.
They're not.
Because Africa possessed massive disease barriers, specifically malaria, that European immune systems simply couldn't handle.
Oh, right.
They couldn't bypass that until the development of quinine and advanced medical logistics in the late 19th century.
So they literally couldn't survive those.
Exactly. Furthermore, to conquer and hold foreign territory, you need a massive surplus of wealth and manpower. The Americas provided that surplus.
Through the silver.
The silver fund of the armies, yeah.
Ah.
But crucially, it was the caloric explosion from New World crops like the potato and maize that fueled a massive European population boom.
Wait, really? The potato?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. So without the potato, Europe literally doesn't have the calorie surplus to generate the population needed to conquer the rest of the world.
Exactly. They are trapped in what we call a Malthusian ceiling. There's just not enough food to support a growing population.
That is insane.
Now let's look at Britain, right? The British Industrial Revolution was built on a very specific mechanism, the triangular trade.
Okay, remind me how that worked.
They imported incredibly cheap raw materials, specifically cotton, cultivated by enslaved people in the Americas, processed it in their new factories, and then sold those manufactured goods back to the captive colonial markets in the New World.
Oh, wow. So if there is no New World, there is no cheap cotton flowing into Manchester.
Right.
And there is no massive captive market across the ocean forced to buy British textiles.
Precisely. Without that highly specific, deeply exploitative transatlantic economic loop, the Industrial Revolution is starved of both its raw fuel and its primary consumer base.
So it just stalls out.
Yeah, the leap from agrarian societies to mechanized industrial powerhouses slows to an absolute crawl. Europe remains financially constrained, geographically boxed in, and internally divided.
The creators of this thought experiment specifically visualized this European stagnation through their cinematic aesthetic notes.
Oh, the lighting directions.
Yeah. They direct the hypothetical documentary to color grade these European scenes with desaturated earth browns, smoky grays, and heavy overcast lighting.
I love that detail.
Right. You are being visually trained to view this alternate Europe as a cold, claustrophobic, incredibly stagnant place.
It's a brilliant psychological cue,
Yeah.
because if Europe is trapped in this cold, overcast stagnation, well, the global power vacuum must be filled.
Someone has to be on top.
Exactly. The economic center of gravity of the human race has to settle somewhere else. And if it's not shifting west into the Atlantic, it remains firmly rooted in the east.
Which fundamentally rewrites the geopolitical hierarchy of the next 5 centuries.
Completely.
Let's look at who benefits from Europe's failure to launch. First up, we have the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, yeah.
Because in our history books, the Ottomans eventually become the sick man of Europe, slowly declining in power. But in this timeline, they remain an absolute juggernaut.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture of global economics, the Ottoman survival makes total, undeniable sense.
How?
Well, why did the Ottomans decline in our timeline? A major, often overlooked factor was hyperinflation.
Oh, from the silver.
Exactly. When Spain flooded the global market with all that New World silver, it completely devalued the currency of the Ottoman Empire, which was operating on a relatively fixed revenue agrarian system.
Wow.
Their economy was fundamentally structurally broken by American silver.
Wait, so the Americas essentially exported an economic crisis to the Middle East?
Absolutely. It was a massive shock to their system.
But in our empty ocean timeline, that silver inflation never happens.
Right. The Ottoman economy remains incredibly stable. Furthermore, the Ottomans controlled the most vital piece of geographical real estate on Earth, the crossroads of the Silk Road.
The land bridges connecting Europe to the wealth of Asia.
Exactly. In our timeline, Europeans used American wealth to build massive navies to bypass the Ottomans by sailing all the way around Africa.
Ah, I see.
But without that wealth, Europe simply can't afford those massive naval detours at scale.
So the Ottomans keep their monopoly. They are the gatekeepers of global trade, and they maintain their leverage, their wealth, and their military dominance for centuries longer.
Yes, they are incredibly powerful. But, they aren't the ultimate superpower in this scenario.
Right, because there's someone even bigger.
Exactly. The real titan, The civilization that steps into the void left by an unindustrialized Europe is on the other side of the Asian continent.
Okay.
We're talking about the uninterrupted, dominant rise of China, specifically the Ming Dynasty and its successors.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because China in the 1400s was already playing on a completely different level than Europe.
Oh, absolutely.
The creators of this scenario focus heavily on the Ming Dynasty treasure fleets.
The fleets of Admiral Zheng He.
Yeah.
Between 1405 and 1433, China launched these massive naval expeditions throughout the Indian Ocean, all the way to the coast of Africa.
And these weren't the tiny, desperate wooden caravels Columbus was sailing, right?
No, not at all. These were colossal, multi-decked treasure ships. They were marvels of advanced engineering, carrying tens of thousands of sailors. China already possessed one of the largest economies and most sophisticated bureaucracies in human history.
But in our reality, they just stopped. They burned the fleets and turned inward.
They did. They faced internal political shifts and decided to focus their resources on terrestrial threats, like the Mongols to the north.
Right.
But here is the critical mechanism of this alternate timeline. In our reality, Europe eventually arrives on China's shores a few centuries later, heavily armed, highly industrialized, and fueled by global colonial wealth, completely upending the Asian power dynamic.
But if Europe is still stuck in the mud, rationing resources and fighting over tiny strips of land in France and Germany.
Exactly. The external pressure that ultimately fractured imperial China never arrives.
Oh, wow.
Without an empowered, aggressive West violently forcing its way into Asian markets, China is allowed to organically expand its sphere of influence over centuries.
So they naturally step into the role of the undisputed global hegemon.
Yes. They control the flow of goods, technology, and culture throughout the Indian Ocean and the Pacific.
And the visual aesthetic the creators apply here is a stark contrast to those smoky grays of Europe we talked about.
Right, the lighting shift.
Yeah, they use warm amber gold highlights. They describe a glowing, sprawling Asian megacity harbor dominating the sea lanes.
It's a gorgeous visual concept.
It really is. It subconsciously programs the viewer to feel the heat, the power, and the inevitable rise of the East.
It forces you to completely reevaluate the cultural default of the modern world.
What do you mean?
Well, today we exist within a deeply Eurocentric and Americentric global narrative, right?
Sure.
The very philosophical underpinnings of our international institutions, like the concept of Westphalian sovereign states or human rights frameworks, are fundamentally Western ideas.
So what does this all mean for the average person participating in the global economy in this alternate 21st century?
It changes everything.
Because if you want to do international business today, I mean, you speak English, the operating system of global commerce is fundamentally tied to the US and the UK.
But in this timeline, the lingua franca of the globe is unequivocally Mandarin.
Wow.
If you are an ambitious merchant in Cairo or a diplomat in a fractured European state, you aren't looking to London or a non-existent New York. You are looking to Beijing.
Right.
The entire infrastructure of international trade, the legal frameworks governing contracts, the architectural aesthetics of major financial hubs, all of it is rooted in Asian, specifically Chinese, traditions.
It's a massive paradigm shift. Instead of a global order built on Western concepts of aggressive individual competition and expansion, maybe the global order is built on Confucian ideals of collective harmony, hierarchical stability, and tributary relationships.
Precisely. The baseline operating system of humanity is completely swapped out.
That's fascinating.
But, this shift in power doesn't just change the language we speak or the philosophy of our trade. It fundamentally alters the physical reality of the world around us. Because without the incredible concentration of capital and ambition in the United States, the 20th century, the era of our most massive technological explosions simply does not happen the way we remember it.
Oh, right. This is where the timeline gets genuinely terrifying regarding progress.
Yeah.
The United States acted as this massive, heavily subsidized catalyst for 20th century innovation.
Mm-hmm.
If you erase the U.S., you are erasing the primary engine for almost every marvel of modern life.
Exactly.
We're talking aviation, microprocessors, the internet, satellites, smartphones.
This raises an important question, though. Like, why did the U.S. drive so much of this innovation?
Right.
It wasn't just raw entrepreneurial spirit. It was the existential threat of the Cold War.
Right, bro. The space race.
Exactly. The United States government, locked in a battle for global supremacy with the Soviet Union, poured unimaginable amounts of fiat currency into deeply unprofitable, highly theoretical research and development.
Right, they had a blank check.
Yeah. I mean, the microchip wasn't invented so you could scroll social media. It was heavily subsidized and miniaturized, so the U.S. military could fit complex guidance systems into the nose cones of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
So, without the US-Soviet standoff, there is no blank check for aerospace engineering. There is no NASA, no Apollo missions.
Nothing like that.
The document specifically notes that the iconic Earthrise photo, the image of our fragile blue planet rising over the barren lunar surface, that essentially kickstarted the modern environmental movement.
Yeah.
It simply doesn't exist. Nobody took it.
Now, human curiosity doesn't vanish, right? The fundamental principles of physics and computation would still be discovered eventually.
Sure.
But the urgency is completely gone. Without the existential terror of the Cold War acting as a pressure cooker, the development of the microchip might take an extra century.
Wow, 100 years?
Easily. Global communication networks might rely on advanced telegraphy or early radio for decades longer.
I used to think of history as this continuous upward curve of progress, like it just naturally happens.
A lot of people do.
But it's really more like an engine. If you take out the high-octane fuel of American defense spending and massive consumer markets, the car is still rolling, but it's coasting.
That's a great analogy.
And while technology is coasting, the geopolitics of the 20th century plunge into an absolute nightmare scenario.
Oh, it gets incredibly dark. Because while the Cold War gave us the microchip, it also gave us a very specific type of global stability.
Right.
Remove the United States, and the major conflicts of the 20th century lose their definitive counterweights.
Let's talk about World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
We view them as these horrific, localized tragedies in time, like they had distinct beginnings and distinct decisive ends. But this alternate timeline proposes something much darker.
Much, much darker.
Without American industrial capacity and fresh millions of troops entering those European meat grinders, the balance of power is far too precarious.
Think about the mechanics of World War II.
Okay.
The Soviet Union absorbed the massive brunt of the Nazi land invasion, but they were heavily sustained by American Lend-Lease programs.
Oh, right, the supplies.
Yeah, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of American-built trucks, millions of tons of food, boots, and aviation fuel.
Wow.
Without that massive logistical lifeline, the Eastern Front looks very, very different.
So what happens? Does Nazi Germany win? Do they swallow the continent?
That's one possibility.
Or does the Soviet Union, fighting a pure war of attrition without Western allies splitting Germany's focus, simply roll over the entirety of Europe all the way to the Atlantic coast?
The creators of the timeline suggest both are equally horrifying possibilities.
Yeah, neither's good.
But what's even more disturbing is the concept of endless conventional war.
Endless.
Because in this timeline, the atomic bomb is never developed in the 1940s.
Which, on paper sounds fantastic. A world without the threat of nuclear annihilation? No kids hiding under desks during air raid drills? No doomsday clock?
It sounds idyllic until you examine the paradox of the nuclear umbrella.
What do you mean?
In our timeline, the concept of mutually assured destruction between the U.S. and the USSR was terrifying. But it functioned as an absolute ceiling on violence. It essentially froze the borders of the developed world. Major industrial powers could no longer engage in total, direct warfare with one another because the inevitable result was planetary suicide.
That is the darkest irony of modern history.
It really is.
The weapon that threatened to end humanity is exactly what forced humanity to stop fighting world wars.
Exactly. It created what historians call the long peace.
Right.
But remove that nuclear deterrent. Remove the overwhelming hegemony of two superpowers. What happens to a geographically claustrophobic, resource-starved Europe?
They just keep fighting.
Indefinitely. You have a return to the multipolar chaos of the 18th and 19th centuries, but with mechanized mid-20th century weaponry.
That sounds horrific.
It is. Nations continuously clash over shifting borders, ethnic disputes, and resource monopolies. The bloodletting never stops because there is no absolute consequence forcing them to the negotiating table.
And if a continent is locked in a state of perpetual grinding warfare, the political structures are going to reflect that trauma.
Inherently.
The democratic ideals that flourish in our timeline, like human rights, open borders, freedom of the press, those concepts require soil that isn't constantly being bombed.
Exactly. A society under constant military threat inevitably trends toward authoritarianism.
Right.
They prioritize security, militarization, and absolute state control over individual liberty. The timeline projects a global landscape that is vastly more dictatorial, fractured, and deeply paranoid.
So we have a world where Europe is a smoldering, perpetually warring continent, technology is crawling at a snail's pace,
Yeah.
and global economic power is concentrated in a dominant authoritarian East.
Yes.
But this doesn't just rewrite borders and GDP, it completely rewrites the hardware of daily human expression. What happens to culture?
This is where the thought experiment hits closest to home, I think. We are talking about the total erasure of American soft power.
Right.
America wasn't just a military and economic hegemon. It was the operating system for global culture.
That operating system analogy is perfect because in our world, America stones that almost every nation adopted or reacted to.
Exactly.
But in this timeline, you aren't just running different software. Every region is using completely incompatible hardware.
Yeah. Without America, there is no Hollywood. No jazz, which means no rock and roll, which means no hip-hop.
Wow.
The entire lineage of 20th and 21st century popular music simply doesn't exist.
That is hard to wrap my head around.
There are no massive cinematic universes centered around superheroes. There is no blue jeans culture, no ubiquitous fast food architecture, no global obsession with the NBA.
But human beings still need to be entertained, right? They still need art and mythology. So if they aren't looking to Los Angeles, where are they looking?
The creators suggest that the global cultural center would logically follow the economic center. They envision a scenario where Tokyo, for example, becomes the undisputed entertainment capital of the Earth.
Oh, I love this concept. A Tokyo-centric cultural sphere.
Yeah.
They describe these sprawling, cyber-historical cityscapes with massive holographic theaters and neon advertisements, but all broadcasting in non-English scripts.
It's such a cool visual.
It feels deeply familiar as a modern city, but conceptually, it's completely alien to our Western sensibilities.
And think about how the actual narrative tropes of storytelling would shift.
Like the plots of the movie.
Yeah, American cinema is obsessed with the myth of the rugged individual, the single exceptional hero who breaks the rules to save the day.
Right, the lone wolf.
It's the core of the superhero genre, the Western, the rogue cop movie.
Because that is the foundational myth of America itself. The pioneer, the rebel.
Precisely.
Ah.
But if the dominant cultural exporter is rooted in East Asian philosophical traditions, the storytelling tropes fundamentally change.
So what do they look like?
Blockbuster entertainment might prioritize narratives of collective harmony, duty to the state or family, and the tragedy of individual rebellion rather than its triumph. The stories that thrill the global audience would celebrate the restoration of order rather than the breaking of the system.
It's just wild to think about a teenager in this alternate world going to the movies, and their foundational mythological heroes are completely untethered from anything we recognize.
Completely different values.
But even then, without the massive homogenizing amplifier of American globalization, does a global culture even exist?
But that is the core of the cultural vacuum. The timeline argues we would live in a hyper-regionalized world. We wouldn't have a monoculture.
Right. Today, a teenager in Paris, a teenager in Cairo, and a teenager in Tokyo might all be listening to the same exact pop artist, wearing the same brand of sneakers, and using the exact same social media app.
But in this reality, that shared cultural language vanishes.
Wow.
A joke made in a Parisian cafe physically cannot translate to a student in Beijing because they share zero cultural touchstones.
That makes sense.
The slang, the fashion, the culinary trends,
Yeah.
it is all deeply walled off. Information doesn't sweep across the globe in a viral wave. It stays contained within its regional borders.
It feels incredibly isolating. I mean, we spend so much time today critiquing globalization, how it paves over local traditions and creates this bland corporate monoculture. But when you actually envision a world without any shared cultural language at all, it's chilling.
It is.
It feels like humanity is living in these separate, heavily fortified silos, unable to truly understand one another.
It's a profound disconnection.
Yeah.
But as massive as empires falling and culture fracturing is, the timeline saves its most devastating, intimate realization for the very end.
I know what's coming.
We've talked about the macro mechanics of history, but the final consequence of an empty Atlantic Ocean is deeply personal. It's entirely existential.
This is the demographic butterfly effect. And when I fully understood the mechanics of this, I actually had to put the source material down and just stare at the wall.
It's intense.
The creators put it bluntly. If America never existed, Hundreds of millions of people currently alive would never have been born.
It is the ultimate, inescapable logical conclusion of everything we've discussed.
Hmm.
And the math behind it is brutally airtight.
You're reading along thinking abstractly about Ming Dynasty trade routes and Ottoman inflation, and suddenly the scenario points a finger right at your chest. Your life is an anomaly.
Think about the immense, unprecedented human migrations of the last 5 centuries.
Mm.
The Americas acted as an enormous demographic pressure valve for the entire Old World.
Right.
Millions upon millions of people crossed the Atlantic. They were fleeing the exact Malthusian traps, famines, religious persecutions, and endless conventional wars we just discussed.
Or they were forcibly brought over through the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade.
Exactly. But in this reality, that pressure valve is welded shut. That ocean is empty. There is nowhere to go.
So they stay.
Yes, the Irish family fleeing the potato famine has no ships taking them to Boston. They remain in Ireland and likely perish.
Oh.
The political dissidents in Germany have no refuge. They are crushed by the state. The generations of enslaved Africans are never stolen from their homelands, entirely altering the demographic and political future of the African continent.
And because these massive populations remain trapped in the old world, the entire lineage of humanity is completely irreversibly scrambled.
Absolutely.
The people who were supposed to meet and have children never cross paths, different people marry, different people die in wars that shouldn't have happened or survive plagues that never spread.
The timeline states that human identity itself becomes unrecognizable.
Sure.
The actual physical cast of characters making up the human race is completely swapped out.
I really want you, listening to this right now, to trace your own existence back.
Try it.
The scenario literally argues you probably wouldn't be living the life you're living right now. In fact, you almost certainly wouldn't exist.
It's highly unlikely.
Even if you don't live in the United States, your ancestors' survival was dictated by this global butterfly effect. Maybe your great-grandparents only met because an American company opened a factory in their European town.
Or maybe your family survived the 1940s because American supply lines kept their city from starving.
Exactly. Maybe your parents bonded over an imported American song. You pull the massive thread of the Americas out of the tapestry, and your specific combination of DNA simply never materializes.
It highlights the extreme fragility of our reality, the sheer improbability of our own individual existence.
It's wild.
We are the byproduct of a very specific, highly chaotic set of historical variables.
Entire cities of intersecting lives, Chicago, Buenos Aires, Toronto, Los Angeles, wiped completely off the board. It's a heavy, melancholic realization.
It really is.
Which leads to how the creators of this project actually plan to make an audience feel that specific melancholic weight. You mentioned earlier how they use color, the smoky grays for Europe, the warm amber for Asia, to manipulate our understanding of the geopolitics. But they use audio and pacing in an equally manipulative way to drive home this existential erasure.
They're essentially designing a psychological experience, not just a historical lecture.
Yeah.
The notes on the documentary sound design are incredibly deliberate. They rely on deep, ambient, low-frequency drones.
Right. It's not a triumphant orchestral score. It's an atmospheric weight pressing down on you.
Exactly. And they specify the pacing of the narration. They want it slow, highly cinematic, and they explicitly call for subtle breath realism in the voiceover audio.
Which sounds like a weird technical note, but the effect is profound. It makes the narrator sound intimately close to you, almost whispering.
It strips away the booming, authoritative voice of God you usually hear in historical documentaries.
Oh yeah, the typical narrator voice.
Right. Instead, the narrator becomes a quiet guide, walking you through a graveyard of a timeline that never was.
Mm-hmm.
It feels intensely private. When they combine that intimate breathing voice with the ambient drones and a very sparse, emotional piano score for the final scenes, it is engineered to evoke a specific emotional response. Mourning.
Mourning for a reality you've never actually lost because you're still living in it?
Yes. They want you to stare at a hypothetical, wide cinematic shot of this alternate Earth, rotating in the dark, and Earth without the glowing grid of the North American megalopolis, and feel an authentic sense of grief for the fractured, stunted humanity living on that sphere.
It is a masterclass in using sensory tools to ground a massive abstract thought experiment into a visceral, emotional reality.
It truly is.
It really is an incredible journey they've mapped out. We started with Columbus, staring into the violent, empty gales of the Atlantic, realizing his financial gamble just destroyed the Spanish economy.
Right.
We watched the dominoes fall, Europe trapped in a cold, Malthusian stagnation, unable to launch the Industrial Revolution. We saw the Ottomans maintain their iron grip on global trade, while the Ming Dynasty organically rose to become the undisputed, hyper-powerful center of the global economy.
We examined a 20th century stripped of its high-octane technological urgency. A world trapped in the endless, grinding misery of conventional warfare, without the stabilizing terror of a Cold War nuclear umbrella.
We envisioned a culturally fractured planet operating on deeply unfamiliar hardware, lit by holographic neon in Tokyo rather than the glow of Hollywood.
And finally, we faced the terrifying math that erased our own existence from the timeline entirely.
It is a comprehensive, ruthless deconstruction of everything we take for granted. But before we conclude, the creators leave us with one final, deeply provocative concept.
A thought that lingers long after you finish exploring their empty map.
Yeah, we've spent this entire time looking at what humanity lost without the unifying, homogenizing force of American-led globalization. We view the regionalization of the world as a tragedy.
Like those walled-off gardens we discussed, where cultures can't communicate.
Yes, but there's a flip side to that regionalization.
Oh, definitely.
If humanity developed more slowly, in deeply isolated pockets, entirely separate from a dominating global monoculture that exports one single way of doing business and one single aesthetic, what entirely new philosophies might have been born in those dark spaces.
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating pivot.
Right. What completely unique forms of government, what entirely different ways of organizing human society or understanding our relationship to the environment might have flourished in a world that wasn't instantly paved over by Western capitalism and global internet culture.
That's such a good point. We mourn the loss of our hyper-connected modern world in this scenario, but we might also be mourning the absence of incredible human achievements that our reality simply crushed before they could bloom.
Exactly. What brilliant radical ideas never saw the light of day because they didn't fit into the dominant American-led globalized culture?
It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is a highly unified, homogenized world inherently better than a highly diverse, fragmented one?
That is the question.
What parts of the human experience did we sacrifice in our rush to connect every single corner of the globe to the same cultural and economic grid? It is something for all of us to seriously mull over.
It truly is. It reframes the entire concept of progress. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the timeline that changes everything.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. It's a powerful reminder to keep questioning the fragile, highly improbable foundations of the world around you. Because the next time you wake up, pour your coffee, and look out the window at the skyline, just remember how easily it could all have been an empty, endless ocean.